Good evening, guys. Today, me and my group are going to present a seminar about the article called The English as a Foreign Language and Lingua Franca Debate, Sensitive Teachers of English as a Foreign Language Towards Teaching English as a Lingua Franca. But first, let's know a little bit about the authors. They are both Italian women and professors of English language and translation. Um, so first we have Gillian Mansfield. She's from University of Parma in Italy. Um, some of her interestings are discourse analysis, pragmatics, and corpus linguistics. And also, by the time she was writing the article back in 2011, she was interesting in researching the interactional features of verbal human in the TV sitcom because she was involved in analysis and translation of media language texts. Then we have Franca Popi. She's from University of Modena in Reggio Emilia in Italy. She is focused on learner autonomy and advising in self-instruction. Also, she's interested in linguistic, social, and psychological dimensions of discourse analysis, which brought her to study discourse analysis and language variation, intercultural communication, and the social linguistics of English as a lingua franca. Also, by the time she was writing this article in 2011.
Here in the introduction, we have globalization as the first topic because it's something really important for us to understand this idea of a global language to fit in this new globalized world, which is really important for communication as well. So English became an international tool and a lingua franca for this communication. Later, we have the technology development, which is something that is really cool because now we have access to data. The teachers now can have more content for this. We have everything in electronic format. So this updates the training process, the classes, the methods. And in this text, the analysis were made in two connected purposes. The first one is to synthesize teachers of the existence of different English around the world, which touches the social linguistic and the cultural approach for it. The second purpose is an analytical framework that can be applied to any variety of texts in order to enhance EFL teaching methodology. And this last topic is really connected with the raise awareness of acceptance of other English, because it's something that we're going to talk about a lot in the next discussions. Since we're talking about a text written by two Italian women, nothing better that brings up the education context from Italy. So the Italian education context brings up the English relationship with Europe and Italy, which is something really similar with the Brazil situation, because we have their English as a dominant language in the education sector and as a first language and as a first foreign language, actually. So the EFL teaching institutions kind of like in the same way we do here. So they also get the requirements of international examination boards for academic and professional circles. So the Italian situation in this context is they just put the levels of the students graded in B1 for non-language specialists written, and C1 and C2 for language specialists. Um, the hegemony of the British and the American standard English model is also something that was brought here for um, by the two authors, because it's the only acceptable norms in a worldwide scale, which is something really problematic. And also the teacher's perspective and necessary changes to be made here in the whole scenario, because we are facing here more communicative program. So um, we need lessons that focus on the meaning and the functional, and not only in form. And this learn not only one English is another discussion that really fits here, because involves the interchangeability, which is the link between language and identity. Um, Something really cool to discuss later as well.
Now, first of all, we must understand the difference between these acronyms. EFL is English as a foreign language, where the students are encouraged to imitate the language of native speakers of Standard English. So the standard pronunciation is seen as their only appropriate goal. While in EOLAF, English as a lingua franca, the teaching is based on the ability to communicate the message appropriately in an international context rather than focusing on native speaker models. So it's about clear pronunciation and being easy to understand by a wide variety of people. Even though teachers must be aware of the fact that university students will be confused by what EFL and EOF means. For the uninitiated Italian students, these acronyms could actually be synonyms, since their language studies go under the name of EFL, so they may be confused. However, they must understand that bringing their institutional English to the outside world is necessary because they will encounter varieties in other non-native speakers of English from other nations. Still, we face two divergent situations in Italian universities. While a few courses of studies recognize the importance of language variation, multiculturalism, pluricentrism, and multilingualism, others consider the monolingual native speaker of Standard English as the basis of language proficiency. As already pointed out, English is a lingua franca necessary for international communication. So teachers ought to get their students aware that aiming at native standard may be ineffective and discouraging on neo-life communication, considering that you have the risk of an unilateral idiomaticity, where the use of certain expressions could result in incomprehension by the other participants in the interaction. So then this would be EFL teachers' responsibility to help their students develop common, pragmatic, or realistic strategies of achieving reciprocal understanding. With that in mind, teachers must realize that EFL training does not prepare the students to get through the difficulties of realistic communication with other non-native speakers. So, as long as they accept and recognize this transition from EFL speaker to real-life user, they will be able to transmit it to a student and consequently make them comprehend that the attention should not be aimed only to the native speaking norm, but to exposure to other varieties of English that are becoming more notable in the world today. For this reason, the authors decided to create an example corpus of World English to make their point. So they used Chinese English as represented in the China Daily online newspaper.
In the topic Methods, Objectives, and Materials, the authors discuss how questions about the relationship between English as a lingua franca and English as a foreign language, especially their impact on the English language classroom, must be addressed for learning objectives. So, if we think that any teaching requires the definition of goals and objectives, in other words, something that the teaching and learning is directed at, we realize that learning goals in language teaching have traditionally been formulated with reference to standard language. It is important to say that the writers are not advocating a rejection of all norms and standards, but a reappraisal of their justification, because attention should be paid to such issues as communication, accommodation, and identity formation. For that reason, even though there is no thoroughly described and institutionalized variety of English as a lingua franca, and consequently it is not possible to teach and learn it, it is necessary to recognize it. The present study has been devised with the main aim in mind of raising teachers and subsequently students' awareness of the existence of several Englishes, and not just the standard one on which their institutionalized learning is based. So, the authors have devoted the focus of attention to articles published in the China Daily, which is the only national English language daily newspaper distributed in China. Headquartered in Beijing, the China Daily has a website that projects 6 million hits a day, as that newspaper has a worldwide readership. It has long been the prime news source for foreign businessmen, diplomats, and academics engaged in China. The corpus includes 130 articles from the local news section, collected in 2006 and 2007, totaling about 100,000 tokens and 9,100 types. According to the authors, media language in general never fails to present a rich source of material for awareness-raising activities, and newspapers in particular offer numerous written text types worth of study. Corpus collection is indeed becoming a more frequent kind of activity which teachers themselves can carry out with specific tasks in mind for their students, rather than relying on more generalized reference corpora for the simple tasks of meaning searches as well as lexicogrammatical patterns. Some authors emphasize the relevance of corpora to language teaching materials, writers, course designers, and language teachers, and the pedagogical relevance of corpus finds in terms of understanding the vocabulary needs of language learners. More recently still, Mansfield and Pop suggest ways in which students can also be encouraged to create their own specialized corpora to pursue investigations into areas of particular interest, such as evaluative adjectives on promotional websites and use of personal pronouns in political speeches. So, peer development can be traced in methodological procedure with an emphasis on authenticity of materials and research purpose, whereby creative responsibility is gradually passed on from ready-made authentic materials for teachers to exploit. This can be this can either be task searching for recurrence of linguistic phenomena in a more norm-directed context by means of generalized reference corpora, or those that will highlight the kinds of linguistic variety that emerge from the China daily corpus devised for the present study.
Following the same topic that Manuela just discussed, Mansfield and Poppy also consider redressing the balance in course objectives. The authors bring the idea that teachers should take into consideration not only the short-term objectives of their courses, that is, the achievement of a certain level of competence that matches the norm-based EFL standards of learning the language, but they also should focus on the long-term ones. Those terms might reflect the reality of the world outside the institutional environment and the actual use of English in a lot of situations. One objection of ELF scholars to standardized forms of international examination is their need to test the standard norm in the ESOL or in the TOEFL exam, and consequently to make students produce as close as possible to the native speaker's competence in the context in which they are set. Actually, almost no space is given for the presentation of non-standard or more localized varieties of English in the written texts used for comprehension. Concerning the receptive skills, While we may have the inclusion of varieties in accent in the listening comprehension section, like the British, the American, the Australian, the Scottish, the same cannot be said of the content of written documents, which will remain within the bounds of the standard structural, lexical, and pragmatic forms. Therefore, according to Mansfield and Poppy, in an age where teaching and testing are so clearly dependent on each other, it is time to start proposing new contents in the EFL learning program that truly reflect both the productive and receptive skills of non-native speakers of English, the skills that they are likely to need in the world of global communication. The authors present recommendations that Castro was already given in 1982, that is, to devise a methodological and attitudinal approach that would incorporate the following 6 points into the language syllabus and which, according to them, are applicable to the kind of sensitizing they are advocating for their Italian students. The first one is the social linguistic profile. That's an overview of English in its world context with discussion of selected major varieties and their users and uses. The second is the variety exposure. That's an exposition of the repertoire of major varieties of English, native and non-native, their uses, their users, specific texts, shared and non-shared features of different at different linguistic levels. The third is the attitudinal neutrality, that's for teaching purposes, focusing on one specific variety and at the same time emphasizing awareness and functional validity of other varieties. The fourth is the range of use, that is the functional appropriateness of the lecture range of varieties within a specific variety. The fifth is the contrastive pragmatics, the relationship of discursive and stylistic innovations and their relationships to the local conventions of culture. An example of the strategies used for persuasion in a language. The sixth is the multidimensionality of functions, that is, the linguistic implications of the functional range, as in the media, in the literary creativity, in the legal system, and in a lot of other fields. Mansfield and Poppy also mention various studies carried out in Europe concerning the acceptance of native speakers' norms, both on the part of the teacher and the learner. The first one, relating to the learners, was done by Timmins in 2002, and it carried out a survey on 400 English students in 14 different countries, which revealed that it was the learners themselves who were highly oriented to achieving a native speaker competence. The second was done by Murray and revealed that Swiss non-native teachers were not inclined to accept a model based on European lingua franca English. And that's probably due to the fact that they had invested so heavily in a near native speaker competence that they didn't wish to see their achievement devalued. And the last one, regarding the Italian situation, with the examination-oriented teaching requiring specific competences and students requiring recognition of language achievement in the form of certification, the emphasis is still predominantly on the native speaker norm. The authors gave some simple activities using newspapers and considering the relevance of identity in media texts. They say that it is good practice for teachers to ask students to know the social linguistic elements peculiar to news texts. And when it comes to the quantitative/qualitative analysis proposed by the authors in this article, teachers should invite students to observe newsworthy features of identity and relevance in the readers of the China Daily and their particular implications and significance in the context of these national papers' local news sections. And that's why they consider the starting point for investigating the data.
So, as mentioned before, by using a frequency sort of the daily corpus, we are able to observe a few particularities that happen in a language and that make it diverse and that are important for those in the process of both learning and teaching English as a foreign language. As an example of one of those particularities, we have the number one composition found by the frequency sort, that is the possessive form China's. In one example, this form collocates with national in noun plus one position and defense in noun plus two position. This happens to create longer phrases, such as China's national defense policy and China's national defense in armed forces. In this case, we may have identified a tendency to information packaging in noun phrases. Another particularity that we found in this research was the hyphenate form left at home, followed by the noun children. This case will lead us to Sinclair's concept of semantic prosody. Semantic prosody is a term used to refer to a group of words that, joined together, create a special meaning and give off a specific connotation. This connotation can be positive or negative. This we will only find out if we analyze the composition. In the case of left at home children, the other words surrounding it that may be help, want, or needy, as we found in the frequency sort, this word will be responsible to giving off this negative connotation, this negative prosody. Those are just a few examples of unusual forms that may happen, and they are responsible for making this language so diverse. Now, taking into consideration all that we've learned in this presentation, we are able to conclude a few things. First of all, globalization is not necessarily a bad thing. It is responsible for bringing countries closer together, and this is a positive thing. But we also need to acknowledge that globalization is also responsible for making English and other languages be viewed as commodities instead of symbols of local identity, of ethnic identity. So we need to recognize that English is still a language and therefore has to have its diversity recognized. And in order to do that, the students should be prepared to deal with the varieties they may find along the way, and they should be equipped with the necessary skills to go about their daily lives. But for that to happen, the teachers of English as a foreign language must be prepared to make changes within their programs in order to include a few important things, such as pragmatic, um, include more emphasis in pragmatic fluency, in intercultural communicative competence, better said, and of course, to raise awareness to how much a single language can vary. Those are the references that we used. Thank you so much for your attention. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.